Joining me on the program now is the Minister for Energy and the Environment, Josh Frydenberg, joins us from Melbourne. Minister, thanks for your time. Something I touched on with David there at the start of our chat in relation to the speech the Prime Minister gave in London to that think tank, and pointing out that the Liberal Party founder was at pains to not call his new centre-right party a Conservative party, that it was his vision was about governing from the centre. What do you make of this address?
I think this was a very considered and powerful speech by Prime Minister Turnbull. Obviously its focus was on national security, with a very powerful message to the Europeans that unchecked borders or border chaos can undermine social cohesion. He also had some very strong words to say about Islamic extremism, describing it as a disease on Islam itself, and also talking about the ungoverned digital space and how important it was to ensure that the citizens are protected ahead of the terrorists' privacy. So I think that was very important. When it comes to the philosophical underpinnings of our party, Prime Minister Turnbull is absolutely right that Sir Robert Menzies, when he founded our party in 1944, he specifically took the name Liberal, because he didn't want our party to be a reactionary party, and we were rejecting the socialist panacea. And that is very, very important to remember with our party. And Prime Minister Turnbull has referred to the broad traditions, whether they are Edmund Burke or John Stuart Mill. They come together in the broad church, which is the Liberal Party, and I think he's done that very well.
You're a Conservative. There are suggestions this morning that Conservatives within your party will be outraged and see this as a shot across the bow.
Well, the Prime Minister made the valid point, which is that people aren't focused on what is the label of their beliefs. They're focused on what are their beliefs, namely their commitment to freedom, freedom of speech, freedom in the workplace, freedom of trade, and freedom when it comes to national security and Australia's place on the world stage. They are the underpinnings of what the Liberal Party believes in, and whether you are Menzies or Howard or indeed Churchill or Thatcher, they are your beliefs, and you're not minded about the label that your beliefs are given, but actually how committed you are to them.
So, just in answer to my question though, will there be elements of your party who will be outraged by this speech? You've taken, obviously, a considered approach to this address. You see it as in line with Robert Menzies' vision for the party, but will there be elements who won't like what was said?
Well, I'd point out to anyone who would seek to criticise this speech that we've just been celebrating the anniversary of Sir Robert Menzies' Forgotten People address. And he made it very clear in that address that we were a party that didn't represent big business and big money because they could look after themselves. Indeed, we were not a party established to look after organised labour because they were represented by the unions. We were a party that was established to look after the forgotten people. That is the bulk of the people who don't have organised labour to look after them and who are not represented by big business. So I think the Prime Minister's speech today, insofar as it focused on the broad traditions of the Liberal Party, really tapped that important vein of the forgotten people.
Okay.
And the fact that we as a party are the only party who can represent them, and indeed we are the most successful party in Australia's history, having governed for the majority of time since the Liberal Party was established in 1944.
The big week on energy policy, we've got to move to that now, and the Energy Council of State and Federal Ministers meeting later in the week. You've had a crack at Queensland. What exactly are you accusing the Queensland government of? Because it looks like, from what you wrote yesterday in the Australian Your Opinion piece, that you're accusing them of gouging customers for their own benefit, for their own coffers. Is that right?
Well, the first point I'd make, Kieran, is that the state governments have a huge role to play when it comes to energy policy. Indeed, they were given responsibility under the Constitution. They have historically owned the retail, the distribution, the transmission and the generation assets. And indeed, when it comes to resources under the ground, like the gas resources we have or coal, they belong to the states, not to the Commonwealth. Now, the states can really lift their game when it comes to energy policy. We know in Victoria, they are sitting on 40 years worth of gas reserves. At the same time, gas prices are going up in Victoria, and if the state did develop them, that would be a good thing. We know in South Australia that they have failed to put sufficient emphasis on storage backup for the high penetration of wind and solar in that system. And we know in Queensland, and the figures bear this out, that Queenslanders have been paying 30% above the wholesale electricity market across the national electricity market average there in Queensland. So they're paying 30% more than the other states. Now, the reason why
the Queensland government owns the generators. Are you accusing them of gouging customers?
Correct. I am absolutely accusing those government-owned generators of behaviour which has led to higher prices for Queensland and Queenslanders. And to point this out, if you look at the period from 2014 to the present, the number of times that the wholesale electricity price has gone above $5,000 a megawatt hour in Queensland is 30 times. The next closest state is South Australia at just 16 times. Now, the Queensland budget, the Palaszczuk budget in 2017-18 booked a windfall of $1.5 billion from the generators. Now, that was 110% up, an increase of 110% up from 2015 to 2016. The reason being is that the government was looking to strengthen its coffers at the expense of energy consumers in Queensland.
But you're calling on the Labor governments to do more, but isn't it true that the government in New South Wales, a Liberal government, is sitting on what the energy industry more broadly, and I think the National Energy Market Operator had assumed would be an input of gas from the Narrabri project, which has been stopped for political reasons. You missed the New South Wales government in your message yesterday.
Not at all, Kieran. I've consistently said that for New South Wales, importing more than 95% of their gas is not a good situation. And I've encouraged New South Wales to increase the amount of gas that they develop from their reserves. They have limited the amount of area across that state which is open to the unconventional gas extraction. Now, I do point out that Don Harwin, the Energy Minister in New South Wales, has recently referred to the Narrabri project as going through the considered environmental assessment process. So I'll let that course run. But it doesn't matter if it's the New South Wales government, whether it was the Victorian government or indeed the Northern Territory government, who are sitting on 180 years worth of reserves. The states have to develop their resources, and the Commonwealth will continue to make that point.
Just finally, only a minute left, but on the battery, the Tesla battery that's going to be deployed, you've been downplaying it compared to the input of hydro, but hydro's years away, including the Snowy Hydro 2.0, whereas this battery is going to be up and going by the 1st of December. It's unequivocally good news, isn't it?
Well, we welcome any investment in new storage, and we've been critical, particularly in South Australia, of a failure to put enough storage in their system, as they get nearly 50% of their power from wind and solar. But this announcement is a lot of sizzle for very little sausage. I mean, let's put it in perspective here. They've got 129 megawatt hours of storage, and the Coltana project, where there's a feasibility study underway, which should be finished very shortly, in the Upper Spencer Gulf in South Australia, will have 1,000 megawatt hours of storage, and Snowy Hydro 2.0, which will take some time to build but is a nation-building project indeed, that could provide 350,000 megawatt hours of storage. And I say to the Weatherall government, release the costings of your announcement here, but let's focus not necessarily on celebrity, let's focus on what is needed to stabilise South Australia's system, which unfortunately to date has not had a very good record.
Energy and Environment Minister Josh Frydenberg from Melbourne this morning. Appreciate your time as always. We'll talk to you soon. A quick break, back in just a moment.